representing Alston and Brighton, and the chairman of Ways and Means. I'd like to introduce to my left my friend from East Boston, Councilor Sal LaMartina. To my right, I think will be joining us, Councilor Tim McCarthy. I'd like to remind folks that this is a public hearing and it is being recorded and broadcast live on both RCN and Comcast. I'd ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the question and answer period, we will take public testimony. The sign-in sheets are to my left by the door. Please state your name, any affiliation, and address. We are here today regarding Docket 0256, order for a hearing regarding a post-audit review of the FY 2016 budget. I'd like to welcome CFO Dave Sweeney and our Chief Financial Officer, Sally Glora. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So very, very briefly, I'll provide an overview of FY16 general fund budget highlights that the city auditor, Sally Glora, has put together, and then we can answer any questions you have after that, if that works.
Right.
Okay. So in fiscal year 2016, the fiscal year that ended June 30th, the city finished with a budgetary surplus of $1.92 million. That's revenues in excess of expenditures. Within that, we were able to do a number of things that we had not anticipated when we budgeted for FY16 after having a very healthy budgetary year. So we were able to fund our $40 million in OPEB, which we had budgeted as coming from free cash. We were able to fund that with recurring operating revenue. We were also able to fund $16 million in projects that otherwise would have been charged to capital on the operating budget, which frees up additional capacity on our capital plan in the long term. We were also able to fund health insurance refunds of $10 million, reserve $10 million in execution of courts for potential future legal costs, and make an advance payment on our pension fund of $12 million. This has led to an unassigned budgetary general fund balance increase of almost $43 million in fiscal year 16, which leaves our budgetary unassigned fund balance as a percentage of our annual expenditures at just above 16%.
And we have now been joined by Councilor Tim McCarthy. First, let me start by congratulating you, your office, your teams, and my colleagues for the AAA bond rating that was just announced again. And we know how important that is. It allows us to do a lot more with a lot less money because of our favorable bond ratings and our interest payments. So it's a great thing for the taxpayers of Boston to get a lot more done with the hard-earned dollars that they provide us with. Let me also recognize that we've been joined by Councilor Frank Baker. So this sheet that you gave us, the budget surplus, the 1.92 million is, so if I look at the 1.92 million as the surplus, that was after, correct me if I'm wrong, we took some money from some of the surpluses, like the plowing that we didn't have to do, those other surpluses, and funded some one-time projects like parks, one of them being Smith Park and other parks, and to go through that list, was that also from the surplus? So the 40 million was paid by operational. The 16 is debt service.
So these are. So to answer your initial question, yes, we were also able to accelerate some parks projects and do those with operating what are effectively operating funds due to the snow surplus last year. We had increased our snow budget after the winter of 2015 by I think $5 million at the time, after we had a $38 million winter.
Right.
And thankfully we've had relatively mild seasons since, and we're able to do that. So that is in addition to what's listed here. So effectively you could have had a higher surplus had you not done those parks to bring that to its conclusion. These additional items listed here, the 40 million from OPEB, the 16 million from capital projects, those are items that we're able to absorb the cost of in fiscal year 16 revenues on the operating side, rather than using free cash and capital funds.
Okay. And then the reserves. Let me recognize that we've been joined by Councilor Bill Linehan as well. The funded health insurance refunds, execution of courts, advance payment, are those separate accounts now that you have established, or were they already established?
They're already established, but we've
So annually we pay Medicare insurance refunds to our retirees, encouraging them to use services from Medicare. So that's an annual. It's an annual expense.
Reimbursement, right.
We right now we are like a year behind in paying that. So we pay it this year for last year.
Right.
So we wanted to do a catch up and pay it more timely to the
Right.
retirees. So
It's
we
almost
wanted
pre-funded.
to fund that.
Okay.
And the execution of court is just, in anticipation. We don't know what can really come of some of the filings against the city. So
Right.
it's just
It's a fluctuating number, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And likewise on retirement, we have an aggressive plan to pay down our unfunded pension liability by 2025. So to the extent we can make payments up front, that will ultimately reduce the amount we need to increase our appropriation by every year between now and 2025.
Right.
So while we had the capacity to make some down payments on some items, or to maintain balances in other funds that were anticipated to be used, we used that within our authority in 2016.
And if I'm correct, our debt service for retirement goes up quite a bit every year until 2025, correct?
Yeah, it's around 9%
9%.
annual expenditure increase, which is, it'll probably double what you average in terms of revenue growth.
Right.
So
right.
it's a significant
Right.
obligation. So anything we can do to lessen that impact is significant.
Right. And eventually 2025, that will be paid off. And then we have OPEB, which is about 2.2 billion or so.
Yeah, somewhere in that range.
So we have to turn our attention to that as well.
Exactly.
And again, we are making more headway probably than many other municipalities by this 40 million that's now been. It was lower than that when we first started, I believe, but
Started at 20, 25, went up
Yep.
to 25.
right, right, and we've been doing it since what, 08, I believe.
I do have that. Yeah. I know we've funded it for the last 5 years from recurring revenue.
Right,
Prior to that, it was funded
by free cash, right,
yeah,
especially
one
during
time.
those lean years.
one-time revenue.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah, I think
just looking
people
for-
should understand that we were paying that OPEB liability with free cash, and now we are including it in the budget every year, enabling us to fund other departments as well.
That's right. You're using the money for other
Mhm.
for other purposes. I think it's on page. Sorry. I'll look for it while you're
Yeah,
going.
I'm pretty
think
sure it
back to
started, because I
2000.
started in '08, and I
I
think it was
think-
the first year.
It was
Yeah,
around there.
almost. It's at least 10 years.
Right, right. So we have some money put away for, towards that liability too.
Yes.
If you could get us that, both what we owe on OPEB and what we have contributed so far into that fund. Let me give my colleagues a chance here. Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As Mark started out, the AAA bond rating is phenomenal, and that's unbelievable work by your team. It's more of a statement than a question. Really, is when we talked about the snow budget. I was here during the April Fool's snowstorm, so let's knock on wood and not talk about that until May. But I just wanted to say, I completely agree with you in staying the course with when you have a budget surplus to do one-time items, because I think that one, the neighborhoods see immediate benefit, but two, I think you're, where you don't seem to be in the world of putting Band-Aids on something. You're addressing the problems from the get-go, and I think that when you start using surplus money to put Band-Aids on something, then the next year you're going to need more than a Band-Aid. You'll need a gauze, and it just gets worse and worse. So. That would really is just more of a statement. I completely agree with you staying the course on that, and I look forward to seeing how much surplus and then what we can do with it for District 5. Really, all right. There you go.
Councilor Martina?
Thank you, Chief, Sally. Thank you both for being here, and congratulations on the AAA. Very excited with that. Just basically, one question in regards to the refunds for the health insurance for retirees. What's the average refund for them?
I don't have that. I don't know. I would have to get that for
We
you.
can get you some more info.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
on
It's-
a personal basis. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll be guessing.
So, if I remember right, I remember when Charles Yancey used to have these hearings, and we would go over department to department. Are we doing that today?
Not if we don't
It's
have.
up to the chairman.
How much time you got?
I have a few hours. I have a few hours. How are we doing this year? Your projections for this year?
I think
So
we're doing.
far.
I think we're doing very well. We on the revenue side, we had a better than expected year in terms of new growth property tax revenue that was certified in the tax rate budget in must have been December by Department of Revenue, which noted that the city's new growth, the amount of value increase in the city is $4.3 billion in new growth value compared to $2.3 billion last year, which was also a very good year, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Our property value in 3 years has increased overall from $100 billion to $144 billion. It took about a dozen years to add the previous $44 billion, and you'd have to go all the way back to Proposition 2.5 almost for the previous 44 before that. So I think just what we all see with our own eyes is manifesting itself in our budget picture, and that is we have a very healthy, attractive development climate, which is driving a very strong revenue picture. The flip side of that is we continue to have challenges on the expenditure side. We talked about an average of about a 9% annual increase necessary for pensions to pay down that liability. I think we anticipate somewhere between $15 and $20 million in charter assessment growth this year. That's a number that gets updated over the course of the year. And then obviously the unknown of collective bargaining and how those contracts end up settling as well. So we're doing very well on the revenue side, but we do have some cost concerns that we're treating very conservatively at the moment. And we hope to take a similar philosophy into FY18 in the next month or two.
Great. Thank you.
Councilor Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Morning.
Dave, what is reserve execution of court? Is that all people suing us?
It is, but I will say it's not, the $10 million is not related to individual lawsuits. It's more us just preparing for the possibility that we are sued.
Yeah.
So we will have a reserve in place in case that does occur. The city is engaged in a number of lawsuits at any given time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That way we wouldn't have to dip into free cash or operating funds if we were in fact to lose a settlement or to settle with a.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had talked a little bit about our growth. Can you do we have numbers? So what does that growth mean for our take? And then on the flip side, what is the liability? Like what would our typical liability, if everything remained the same, what would our typical liabilities be as far as growing? So is our take more than what our liability is going to be?
So in there are a lot of moving parts, but what new growth translated to in FY17 was $75 million in new revenue.
Mm-hmm.
That's above just the sort of standard 2.5% increase that's allowed under Prop 2.5.
Yeah.
We're receiving $75 million above that. We had budgeted for a good portion of that, but not the entirety of that. We've had other aid items that have been below budget, like state aid, for instance.
Yeah.
We were a few million below where we expected to be, which is something we're going up to the State House today to advocate to not have happen again, hopefully. But in terms of liabilities, we expect in a typical year going forward, this will grow, but right now something in the neighborhood of $50 million in fixed cost growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then collective bargaining is the big. We spend, I think, $1.4 billion on personnel services every year. So, 1 or 2 or 3% increase to that has a very large impact on whether we can balance a budget. So those are kind of the variables I would say is charter assessment, state aid, new growth, and collective bargaining that'll really drive costs in the future.
And if our take on all that development was $75 million, is that new tax revenue, or is some of that one-time payments for development? That's all tax.
It gets added to the base, which is
Nice.
good because then the 2.5% increase is off of a higher base in the following year,
Mhm.
and then whatever's added the next year added to that
So-
base, et cetera.
So with adding did you say it was 44 billion we added in property value?
Property value, yes.
Yeah. So what that will be for next year's take?
So that's already reflected in the 75 million. So the 44 billion in value manifests itself in a much lower tax take, right? But the 75 million was the this year's portion of that 44.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council Linehan.
Thank you for the extraordinary job you've been doing for a long time
Thank you.
as our chair of Ways and Means. And Sally and David, thank you for your work. I'm just going to piggyback on some of the things that my colleagues were talking about. So in the 75 million in new growth revenue, is that all new development, or does that include increased assessments on existing property?
It does not include increased assessments on existing properties.
Which would increase value and tax take.
Yeah, so these are just this is new construction. There is an element sometimes of a small portion of that growth is properties moving from being under a tax agreement onto the tax rolls.
Right.
But
Yep.
aside from that, it's just new construction.
Right. So were there any 121As or any of that as part of that?
There were some, I don't recall the exact number, but it was I think it was immaterial to the overall increase. For some context, the largest amount of new growth we had ever seen previously was $53 million.
And when was that?
I think that was 2014. It was so that and a decade ago we were seeing increases of I think less than half of that 75 million during the more difficult years of the recession. So it's a very, very, very significant take in terms of the 75 million.
New growth revenue when I first started was like 25 million.
Yeah, there were some lean years.
But then been tracking to 75 million. That's extraordinary. And it looks like, based on all the cranes and all the people working and all the phone calls we get around development, that it's going to continue at least for a while. But it's the same issue for me. What other sorts of revenue besides real estate and property tax revenue have we explored for when assessments aren't as high, when property values change due to a dip, when the development cycle slows down? And we've been riding an amazing wave for the past 6, almost 7 years.
Sure.
And so, is there anything that we had in the 2016 budget that was kind of an advancement in alternative revenue sources that were not property tax driven?
So a couple of things. I think more of the creativity in the city by default is on the expenditure side because we have such strong restrictions on our ability to raise revenue. So we've made efforts such as reducing overtime, renegotiating health insurance agreements with our unions, those types of levers that we have. What we have fewer of is opportunities to diversify our revenue base, right? I've been here talking about this, I think, last year's budget presentations. We're uniquely restricted relative to our peers nationally in our ability to diversify our revenue base. So we have a property tax. It's restricted to 2.5% growth on existing properties. Many of our peer cities who we're competing with to bring jobs to the city or to bring workers to the city or to bring children to the city, whatever it may be, they have the ability to invest more heavily in programming because they, for the most part, have an income or a sales tax, or in some cases, other revenue sources even above that, in addition to a property tax, and they have unrestricted ability to generate property taxes. So I don't say that with an assumption that we want to enact all these taxes, but the reality is we just don't even have the flexibility to even think about it. There are a couple, I think there are some ideas that have been raised in this council for specific revenue sources that would potentially be earmarked for specific policy issues, some of which I think you're aware of. There have been a couple other minor revenue sources that could become available in the future, such as transportation network company rideshare, the Uber and Lyft revenue, or legalization of cannabis. Potentially Airbnb legislation is up there. Those would be potentially nice revenues to have, but they're not necessarily material in a $3 billion budget.
No. But it's eventually something in the real estate market will change. There will be a fluctuation.
Absolutely.
I've seen a few.
Yeah.
But so how about another take? What about, is there anything that has come to pass around more entrepreneurial management of money so that it generates revenue, and not just in the sense that we're getting the maximum amount on our investments, but also some investment that would be outside the box. There's been talk at times of a bank. There's been talk of having our own development agency. Really, actually finance and develop. And then all the money that we have. This is historic, 75 million in new growth for 1 year. What are we doing? Do we need to spend all that money, and can we invest it in a way that'll ensure better financial viability later?
Some of the specific ideas you reference, I've not done a lot of work on. We are extremely interested in any ways to diversify our revenue base, so definitely open to any of those types of discussions. I'll say with regard to the 75 million specifically, a lot of it was already spent in the FY17 budget, so it's not as if we have an extra 75 million to to spend as needed. And the thing what you're talking about with regard to the existing revenue sources, that is our philosophy, is to try to put ourselves onto a path of sustainability. So we've taken the initiative with our financial success recently to save. We've increased free cash. We've also planned for how we're going to spend money in the future. Imagine Boston 2030 and some of those types of things. And then we've made down payments on items such as retirement, execution of courts, health insurance, refunds, capital projects, OPEB, when we've had the opportunity.
Yep. Okay. Mr. Chairman, are we doing one of these on FY17?
Not at this time.
Okay. Will we be doing it prior to a budget?
Probably into the third quarter, more likely.
Okay.
Probably after
after
the
we've already received the
budget.
the 18 budget?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. I know you have another appointment. There was some of the accounts that we have, like Traeger, that I know, and you'll have to refresh my memory. We tried to free up one of those mandatory surplus funds, if you will. Traeger, I guess we let alone, but wasn't there an education fund that we had? And where is that at this point?
I believe that passed the school's Traeger reserve, so that's eliminated.
So I think what it was always included as a part of their budget.
Yeah.
Right.
And then at year end, they could use that as kind of the surplus to
Right.
spread
To
across
cover.
whatever
Right.
they needed to do. My understanding is they've now appropriated it in their budget,
Right.
and they will manage that as they
Right.
close the year.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for coming down and once again applaud the work that you're doing.
I just want to go
sure.
back to
Yeah.
the OPEB for 1 second. You're
Sure.
right. It was fiscal 2008. Over the last 10 years, we've put in about $350 million, including funding for Public Health Commission.
Wow. Oh, that's great. And you don't have the OPEB balance right now. I think the last time I heard it was like 2.1 billion.
It's no, that's probably that's more
liability.
The liability, I'm sorry.
The liability. The balance in the account is $437 million as of 12/31 of 16.
Okay. And the liability, we don't know. You don't have that.
It's
I don't know
slightly
the
in
exact-
excess of $2 billion. I'll get you the exact.
Okay. All right. And once again, I think what we've done over these years, we started out in very lean times, and we had to manage a lot less during those years. And I think the key word is sustainability. So when we enter into new programs and new personnel that go along with programs, that we always keep in mind, how do we sustain this over time to keep the city in a good financial state so that we can continue to grow and provide the best services to the taxpayers. Just been joined by my friend, Councilor Andrea Campbell. Okay. So I know you have an appointment at the State House, and to that question earlier about the Quinn bill, the State House texted back, LOL. Don't tell
Get
him
up
I
there
said
and
that.
tell them we need
Don't tell
more
him-
money.
Don't tell
wanna
him I
come?
said that. I'm already in trouble.
I know. Let's come and advocate with you. But no, thank you both for all that you do, and thank you, Councilor Siomo, for holding this hearing.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
And this hearing is adjourned.